Have you ever stopped to think about how the simple act of roasting a potato could have been a turning point in human history? It sounds absurd, I know, but about 1.8 million years ago, somewhere in the wilds of Africa, a group of primitive humans began to play with something that, at first glance, seemed like just another spark: fire. We're not talking about that emergency match you light to illuminate the bathroom at night. I'm talking about discovering, controlling, and mastering fire. The prehistoric equivalent of the first smartphone, only without a battery and with a much higher risk of becoming human barbecue. Before fire, life was tough. Imagine trying to chew raw meat from an antelope you had just hunted. Without sharp teeth or a lion's stomach, it was basically a festival of pain in the mouth and slow digestion, like dial-up internet. And even vegetables and tubers, those that today you put in a pressure cooker in 15 minutes, were basically fibrous stones that seemed to swallow any attempt at chewing. Hunger wasn't just annoying, it was literally a matter of daily survival. Then, one fine day, perhaps with a lightning strike or the recklessness of a curious Homo erectus, fire appeared. A spark, a torch, and suddenly life would never be the same. Cooking not only transformed foods from hard and fibrous into something soft and palatable, but it also improved digestion and nutrient absorption. It was as if fire had given our ancestors a superpower, more energy, a more active brain, and eventually the ability to invent even crazier things like the wheel and social networks, if they had existed back then. Speaking of brain, here's a fun fact you probably didn't expect. Cooking food may have been humanity's first intelligence injection. Researchers suggest that by eating pre-cooked food, our ancestors spent less energy chewing and digesting, leaving more fuel for the brain to grow. In other words, that dinner, a la primitive fire, not only satisfied hunger but also fed ideas and creativity. Who would have thought that a daily recipe could generate memes and TikToks centuries later? Of course, the relationship with fire didn't start without drama. Imagine a group of Homo erectus trying to keep a flame alive under torrential rain or treacherous winds with tigers and hyenas lurking around. Every spark was precious. There were no grills, oven timers, or pizza delivery. It was the survival game with a spice of adrenaline. This is where the humor of the situation emerges. While today we complain that food cooled in the microwave, our ancestors were probably saying, if we lose this fire, we'll become lion dinner. But the real magic wasn't just in cooking meat. Tubers, roots, and even some grains, previously almost impossible to digest, became edible. Humanity began to experiment with flavors, aromas, and textures in a way that no other animal ever had. It was as if fire had created the first pop-up restaurant in history, a place where each meal was both an innovative and dangerous experience. And of course, with great discoveries come great lessons and mistakes. There were accidents, fat explosions from hunted animals, burns, lost fingers, and many, oops, I think we ate this too raw and now we need to run to avoid getting sick situations. But every mistake was a lesson. Every lost spark taught how to protect, maintain, and make the most of fire. And step by step, our ancestors became masters of cooking without ever imagining that one day someone would invent the air fryer and call it technological evolution. A fascinating detail is how fire changed social structure. Before, each individual was practically an island fighting for their own survival. But around a campfire, something that arose that we can call the first gourmet collective in history. Sharing cooked food, dividing warmth, and nighttime stories began to create bonds. It's practically the direct ancestor of Sunday barbecues and Netflix marathons with popcorn. Historically, the campfire was more than a tool. It was a meeting point, a primitive chemistry class, and collective therapy. And of course, we can't forget the curiosities that make history shine with humor. Studies indicate that Homo erectus could have realized that cutting or crushing food before cooking sped up the cooking process. In other words, almost 2 million years ago, someone already had the idea of preparing ingredients, which today we call meal prep. If they had Instagram, they certainly would have stories with hashtags like perfect fire and roasted potato on the embers. But the impact of fire goes behind the kitchen. It was a shortcut for human expansion. With more nutritious and easier to digest food, our ancestors gained energy and time to explore, hunt farther, and even think of more complex survival strategies. Fire fueled the body, but also the mind and imagination. In a way, we can say that it was the fuel not only for meals, but for civilization itself. And when we stop to reflect, it's incredible to realize how something as simple as cooking food transformed everything: the body, the brain, society, and even cultural habits. Who would have thought that 1.8 million years ago, a handful of curious and brave Homo erectus would do what no animal ever had: transform simple raw ingredients into sources of energy, warmth, and social connection? It's the true beginning of life with flavor, literally. So next time you put food in the oven or microwave, think of the real heroes of humanity, those primitives who, without Wi-Fi, supermarkets, or delivery, discovered that fire could transform not just food, but life itself. They may not have had sophisticated recipes, but they had curiosity, courage, and that hunger for the future that drove all of humanity forward. And here's my final provocation. Can we recognize how small, everyday changes can shape the future, just as fire shaped our past? What would you do if you had before you a new spark of knowledge or technology that could change your life and everyone around you? Comment below, share your ideas, and let's reflect together on how to turn small discoveries into great revolutions, from the oven to real life.